Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Latta. I'm the Executive Director of the International Association for Property and Evidence. I'm the President of Evidence Control Systems. And also, I'm a retired lieutenant from Burbank, California. The title of today's presentation is A Smoking Time Bomb. I'm speaking directly to police administrators. And with this presentation, we're going to talk a lot about storage, but one of the biggest things is this kind of a reminder when it comes to property and evidence. It's one of those areas that just continuously gets us in trouble. If you're reading the local newspaper as a police administrator, we know for a fact that force issues are continuously getting us into trouble. Problems in our jails, historically we've had issues in there, we get the big lawsuits. But something that we're never aware of until it happens is the property room. I've been teaching property and evidence classes since 1984. I started out teaching for Post here in California for the International Association of Chiefs of Police and for the International Association for Property and Evidence. It's an interesting thing is that the vast majority of police administrators do not have a great deal of knowledge in the property room, the evidence room, is because we've probably never had that opportunity to work in there. As a lieutenant, I was put over the property room and I gained a great deal of knowledge and got in the teaching circuit. But every single day, police chiefs are getting in trouble around the country on issues in property rooms. So I read something recently from Chuck Wexler. You may recognize the name. He's with the Police Executive Research Forum, or PERF. You can do everything right and have every officer and have one officer one night do something, and all of a sudden your career is upside down. And in today's environment, we've all seen that. But the property room is quite unusual in that things happen and all of a sudden it's a surprise. Is an officer going to go out there and get in a pursuit and get in trouble? We expect something like that might happen. The force issue, we know that might happen, but we're never prepared for the property room. And so all of a sudden your sergeant lieutenant comes to you as the chief and, hey boss, money is missing, guns are missing, drugs are missing, and we don't know what to do with it. And so I've titled this thing the time bomb. It's a time bomb because quite frequently we're not ready for it. So what I'd like to talk to us today for about 20 minutes or so is some of those big things that rise to the top, such as staffing, big issue for police departments. I'm going to call this statistical data of your inventory. I'm going to talk about the retention of biological evidence by statute, cold case homicides, our space needs for long-term evidence, and evidence that's missing. I'm going to give you some headlines of some of the things that are going on around the country. I've taught my class about 800 times to about 30,000 people. And I would say time after time after time, we find out something very interesting by polling the students. 80 to 90% of law enforcement agencies do not have sufficient staffing to manage their inventory. Now, again, if you're in now I come from a department of 165. We had 3 property officers and we pretty much stayed level. But there will be property rooms out there that will have 2 or 3 people in there and there's 1,000 officers. There's no way that we're allocating our resources because quite frequently we don't know how many people it needs. Another fact is 80 to 90% of law enforcement agencies do not collect the necessary data to make valid decisions about staffing. The room is full, let's put somebody else in there. We're not evaluating data. The majority of law enforcement agencies, their software may not be capable of collecting the data to make decisions. And I've always said in our classes that when it comes to our software is if somebody asks you as the police chief, how many homicides, how many police officer shootings, how many pursuits, how many burglaries, crime rates, response times, we have that data and we get that in seconds. When we ask questions about our property rooms, it's quite frequently that no one knows the question to even ask. I'm going to show this chart up here, and this is probably the norm around the country. If you're listening to this, I'd like you to go into your property room and ask your folks how much is coming in, how much is going out, and see what that difference is. This is a department from an audit that I did. You can see over the years, we've gone from 12,000 to 13,000 to 14,000 to 19,000. This city had annexed another part of the county. They had had some big box stores come in over 10 years, and the intake came in, but they had the same amount of staffing. If you look at the pink line, that's what they're getting rid of. And if you look at that and say, well, that doesn't look good. You as the police administrator, the police chief, are you asking those questions? I think if you look at that, now budgetary issues are always going to be an issue, but when you look at that, is there a problem in the property? And the answer is absolutely yes. And I would say more often than not, we don't know we have a problem based on data. The property officer can come to you and say, hey boss, I need help, I need help, I need help. Well, prove it to me. I guarantee you, if you have numbers like that and you approach your city council, you can articulate why you need help in there. Bet you've got those numbers for calls for service. I bet you got those numbers for a variety of other things. But property, we typically don't keep those numbers, and we don't know to ask for it in some cases. Ask your property folks, what is the ratio of property coming in and property going out? If you're not one-to-one, you just keep getting farther and farther and farther behind. And there are departments where we've done audits. They've got misdemeanor evidence going back 35 years because nobody's done any purging. And 65% of the departments out there have, or even higher than that, probably closer to 75, do not have good purging protocols. Fact, they don't have them. And so every property clerk does a little bit differently. And then we change personnel. We put another person in there. There's nothing in policy on how to do it. Almost 2/3 of the police departments around the country do not have good purging policies. They do not have good property room policies. That's the good news. Let's talk about biological evidence. Now, the biological evidence, when we teach we talk about this in the class, and there's a good likelihood there's a lot of new property officers here, and they're not even aware how long we have to keep it. This goes back about 15 years when the state legislated in 1417 of the Penal Code that we have to keep certain biological evidence for a particular period of time. And in many cases, it's until the person gets out of jail. This is the long-term stuff. And so historically, a lot of this stuff, people are just keeping it forever. Well, we can get rid of it, but you have to be able to track it. Good software really makes a big difference in this. Here's another one out there. We're solving old cold cases every single day. And if you go to our website, and I'll give it to you a little bit later, I've got literally dozens and dozens and dozens of homicides that we've solved this year throughout the United States on cold cases that have been sitting in the property room for 10 and 20 and 30 years. Let's give you an imaginary scenario here. You have a homicide in 1960. So we're talking about 60, 65, 70. I think we can all agree that the police chief is probably passed, the detective is passed, the officer is passed, and that evidence has gotten buried farther and farther and farther. And the problem being is everyone's forgotten about it. There's a 40-year-old case buried in property room and has been forgotten about. A relative asked about the status. Evidence was located, suspects identified with DNA. This is a true one, comes to us from El Paso, Texas. A relative comes in and says, what happens to my mother's homicide? 100 years, I mean, it happened a long time ago. Nobody knows, and they dig and dig and dig, and they find nail clippings from this old homicide. They run it against the DNA database and come up with a suspect. The guy's 77 years old. And my question, is that an embarrassment to our organization that no one has looked at that case since they were working it 40 some odd years ago? And this goes on time and time and time again. So you've got this huge liability in the property room, and no one in your department even knows it's there. No one's even looking for it. Have you asked your property officers to give you a list of all those cases so you can resurrect them? You don't want the citizen coming in and saying, what's going on with mom's case? It's quite embarrassing. I took a snapshot, if you will, of our presentation, our two-day presentation. And if you look at that, there's 16, about 32 cases, a lot of them in California. We do a good job here in California, but those are cases that have happened in the last 7 months that we've cleared. But if you were to drill down and look at how old these cases are, they're 30 and 40 years old, Why hasn't somebody looked at it before? Because we didn't know we had it in many cases. Let me back up here. Now, if you're in a large agency, and just because I'm in Los Angeles County, our next door neighbor where I live is Los Angeles. We're going to have a cold case squad that's going to continue us looking at these. But you go to a small department with 10 people in there, there's been 5 chiefs in the last 10 years, and you've had 10 property officers in that period of time. It may be a project for everybody to look around. 65% of your inventory. This is another one that's kind of interesting. I showed you how much is coming in, how much is going out. The question that should be asked is how much of the evidence that you have in your property is misdemeanor evidence. Now, 99% of the misdemeanor statutes are 1 year. So my question to everyone listening today is, does that suggest that maybe 65% of my overall inventory could be reviewed and possibly purged? And the answer is absolutely yes. There may be some warrants in there, but the prosecutor probably can't prosecute it. Has anyone ever asked the question, what percent of my inventory is misdemeanor? And we don't ask that question. The next one is 25% of the inventory may be a felony. Now, again, you're going to start out with 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. There's nothing that says you can't get rid of it. If a person has been arrested and done their time, you could probably get rid of it. You could arrest somebody with a kilo of cocaine and 100 other items in the case. Doesn't mean you can't get rid of it. What do you need to prosecute the case is the cocaine. But when you look at these numbers, let's go back. 65% is misdemeanor, 25% is felony. There's a lot of things that can probably be purged, but why don't we do that? For software and not enough people, and we continuously get behind. The more stuff you have in the property room, the more difficult it is to find things. Which leads, last one is, there's probably 10% of the stuff that you have in your property room could be a keeper. That means it's probably not going to go anywhere. It's an old homicide. The prosecutor's not willing for you to get rid of it, even if the person's been convicted. But some homicides you may be able to get rid of with concurrence of the prosecutor. You have a manslaughter from 15 years ago. The husband has done 5 years in prison. The case is over with. Ask the prosecutor, maybe you can get rid of it. But the interesting thing about this is, with this long-term evidence, no one knows what to do with it. You also have what I call static inventory. This one's really kind of important and leads to one of the things that our host, Safe Store, does. It keeps that, they can keep those items that you think you're going to keep for 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that number is kind of important. And I put this chart together. I'm going to say 2020, 2021. You'll notice the static has gone from 29 to 32. That means by evaluating our overall inventory, those are things we're going to have to keep for long, long periods of time, and it's taking up a tremendous amount of space in our property homes. I challenge all of you to look at your inventory and determine how much is static. In other words, we can't do anything with it. It's just going to hang around. And I always say it's going to hang around like bad relatives. We're not going to get rid of it for multiple years. And what that kind of leads to is something like Safe Store, where they can pick it up, keep it for multiple years, and free up that space in your property room. And if you think about it, if 10 or 20 or 30% of your property room is that, go back to that term again, static inventory, maybe that's a great candidate for keeping it or moving it out and putting it in an off-site location whose security may be better than some of our other police departments. The next thing, in closing this out, I'm going to spend about 10 minutes. And this is my scare session. I do this quite frequently around the country. Chief retires, evidence scandal. Everyone, I surf the internet daily looking for property room stories, evidence room scandals. And there's probably not a day that goes by around our country that somebody doesn't get arrested, somebody doesn't lose their job, or somebody commits suicide over a property room scandal. I'll give you our website, and you can go in there and look at all the stories yourself. But we do not, police departments are reticent for some reason to know they have a problem, and we just wait for the problem. I'm going to play a short video, and I want you to notice the date on here. This is about two months ago in Wichita. It's Sedgwick County Sheriff's Department. And listen to the news clip.
County Sheriff calls the theft of guns, drugs, and money from the county's property and evidence room a major breach. CAKE's Eli Higgins reports the lost evidence is now affecting the prosecution of dozens of cases.
It's very frustrating. It's very embarrassing, to be real honest with you.
Sedgwick County Sheriff Jeff Easter made the difficult announcement Friday afternoon. He says a longtime supervisor has been stealing more than 50,000 pieces of evidence for months from the county's storage building in South Wichita.
This is probably the second worst thing that's ever happened in my career because it's under my leadership.
Everyone, the worst thing that's happened in his career. As you read more stories about this, this could have been prevented. The person was in there for 15 years. He and one of the evidence custodians. You do not steal 50,000 items in several months. He's been there for years. He's been doing it for years. And I know for a fact they probably weren't doing any audits, inventories, or inspections. And quite frequently, management doesn't know what to look for. And $150,000, why was it in the property room? The trend out there right now is putting money in the bank, and I'll say it, I've been saying it for years, money doesn't go to court. The prosecutor wants us to keep it, but if you lose enough of it, they'll say, well, maybe we should put it in the bank, and that happens all the time. Let's go on. Here's another $27,000. Let's listen to a short video.
Missing money at the Oklahoma City Police Department. At least $27,000 vanishing from the evidence room.
And tonight, the police chief admitting they have no clue what happened to it. News Force Peyton Yeager on the night beat.
And Peyton, this has now led to a complete change for the way they do things there.
Yeah, a complete shakeup here at the police department after the city auditor tells me the way they were handling things was leading to theft, loss, and misuse, possibly tracing back to nearly 2 decades ago.
We don't know. We don't know.
The numbers not adding up for Oklahoma City Auditor Jim Williamson. $27,000 gone and last seen inside the Oklahoma City Police Department property room.
It could be an accounting error or it could be stolen.
Bundles of cash unaccounted for. $10,000 missing from case envelopes. Another $16,000 checked out to the district attorney's office. But
everyone, there's a telltale trace. They're not doing inventories. They said money is missing from the envelopes. Those envelopes were still on the shelf empty. So is anybody doing an inventory? Absolutely not. And you look out there and there's departments around the country, large ones with 1 million pieces of evidence. They do an inventory every year, but they're doing it throughout the year. This section this month, and they work through the entire property. This one here could have been avoided. 100% sure of that. Let's take a trip to Braintree. This is absolutely horrible.
Money missing from a local police department, and that lost evidence in Braintree is now putting hundreds of criminal cases in jeopardy. Tonight, the mayor of Braintree says this is deeply troubling. Let's get right to Julie Lonchek, working the story live in Braintree tonight. Julie?
David, the DA's office is currently reviewing hundreds of cases. The Attorney General's office is also now involved because this audit didn't just find this evidence was missing. It found it was improperly stored, secured, and recorded.
I find the auditor's report of unaccounted for items and poor record-keeping practices by the police department to be deeply troubling and unacceptable.
Unacceptable, ladies and gentlemen. We've got all of this money missing in here. We have a suicide that occurred. The property officer killed himself after he stole $407,000. So that we know that people were demoted as a result of this, and no one can figure out, well, how did this happen? How did this happen? And it happens because we do not have good internal controls. Nobody's paying attention. And I'll say this, I may offend someone, but quite frequently from the top of our organizations, we don't know what to look for. And I can say that after all the classes we've done. Here's another one, ex-Springfield cop accused of stealing another $400,000.
It's live outside police headquarters with the latest information.
Kevin Burnham, a retired Springfield police officer, is accused of stealing more than $385,000 from the police evidence room.
$375,000. Later turned out to be $400,000. He didn't appear for court one day. He had committed suicide. And this is another one that embarrasses the department. But why in the world do we have $400,000 in there? And these cases go back 10 and 20 years. No one was paying attention. No one was doing audits or inventories. And again, why in the world do we keep that much money? The trend out there right now is putting it in the bank almost immediately. I know the department I retired from, the money comes in from a case last night. It's in the bank by the end of today. And again, we've got to get it out of there. It's a target. Here's an interesting one from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Let's play a real quick clip here.
$150,000 in cash is missing from the Lancaster County Drug Task Force. The Lancaster County District Attorney Heather Adams made the announcement today, noting that her office realized the cash was missing as they worked to review the procedures of the Drug Task Force once she took office in January. She says the discrepancy was discovered in April after an internal audit done by a team from the county detective's office who are not part of the Drug Task Force. The money was seized as a result of about a dozen cases from 2019 or older, and it was kept in a secure location with limited access.
There is no easy way to say this, and I'm not going to diminish its import. This appears in every aspect to be an internal theft, but we must await the complete investigation.
I'm amazed at her analysis. It appears to be internal. There's limited access. There's two people who had access to it. Were they doing audits and inspections? No, they weren't. I have another video. I won't play it right now, but she comes back after they've studied the issue, and we're going to put money in the bank as quickly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee if the money was not retained in the property, the target would have gone away. And the idea of putting it in the bank comes from the prosecutor. I want you to look at the date. I was ready to close this thing down and save it for the presentation. And here we are, a police chief made the headlines. I stole $80,000. It's a continuous, ongoing thing. This is the last of the money. I want you to look at this, everybody. $3.5 million has been stolen in the last 4 years from property rooms, and nobody's alarmed. But what happens in all of these departments, it's like they put it in the bank. But I find it very interesting is that we don't start putting it in the bank as a regular procedure until it's missing, and that shouldn't happen. Here's one that happened here in California, in Bakersfield, not Bakersfield, in Kern County. The sheriff's department, these two gentlemen stole a whole bunch, 351 pounds of marijuana. Look at the date, August of this year. They got down to sentencing, etc. And if you look at this case, there were no protocols, or if there were, nobody followed them. They walked into the property room one day and said, hey, you remember the dope on this particular case? We're going to go destroy it for you. Nobody questioned it. The bottom line is those were the collectors, and then the keepers of the property room should have protocols that they are the ones that destroy it under the supervision of a third party, somebody from another unit. That just, everything got thrown out and they completely ignored it.
Officers had to arrest one of
This next one is going to be on guns.
Officers had to arrest one of their co-workers today after the police chief says an evidence technician was caught stealing jewelry and guns. According to officials there, one of the guns taken out of evidence vault got back onto the streets and was used in a recent murder.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have a gun stolen from the property that is used in a murder. What is the community saying? How much did the city pay for this one? Huge. And there's a whole bunch of major problems in this as you drill down into it. The first thing that the chief said, this was isolated. Well, when they got into the investigation, the young lady had stolen over 200 guns, and her husband was selling them online. But is it fair to say the organization had no idea what they were doing in the property if 200 guns had been stolen? And I would suggest that oversight leadership failed in this one. A recent murder, chief isolated event, it was not isolated. This one's been going on in Southern California. This is as bad as it gets. I would suggest if you go to Google and do a Google search for Orange County Sheriff's Department, you will find 20 stories written about this. It started back in November, where it was determined that some of the deputies were not turning their evidence in a timely manner. They audited thousands of cases, and a large percentage of the evidence was not being turned in a timely manner. Some was not being turned in at all. The investigation started. As a result, 30, it brings to 30 the number of deputies considered for charges. Folks, this is not good. 2 have already pled guilty to some charges that and pled guilty. And ladies and gentlemen, look at that. You've got 30 deputies that are being considered. Now, an interesting thing is right now, as you look around the country, we're trying to charge cops with everything. And that 30 was a lot smaller until everything broke loose in our country a couple months ago. Now the prosecutor's going back and say, well, we got to reevaluate that. Maybe there's more prosecutions. We have to be more transparent. But this is a simple little thing. It's not a property issue. It's the bottom line is they had a policy, turn it in by the end of the shift. Deputies weren't doing it in 35% of the cases. I blame this on first line supervisors. And there's a whole discussion we could talk about on this one. That's the good news. Folks, I'm going to wrap this up here. I'm Joe Latta, retired from Burbank. If you go to www.IAPE, you will have the ability to go in and look at those headlines and look at those and see some of the big problems. I have another company, Evidence Control Systems. My website is also there. My phone number is there. That we do audits, inventories, and studies. Unfortunately, many of the invites I get are after the stuff is missing. We need to be more vigilant in doing inventories. We need to be more vigilant in getting rid of the things we don't need. And if we have to keep it for a long, long period of time, there are resources out there such as SafeStore that can help you out by keeping this for a long period of time. So I'd like to thank Randy Turtle, who is the owner of SafeStore.